Hello and welcome to Fire Headlines, where we discuss the hottest topics in fire service news. I'm your host, Samantha Didion, and joining me on the panel is Chief Ken Kehmna. Today we're discussing the hidden risk firefighters face while on duty. This topic was inspired by an article from the Daily Dispatch that shares the story of a Kansas City firefighter who was severely injured while battling a structure fire. The injury itself occurred when a driver ran over a fire hose, causing the hose coupling to fly up and hit a firefighter's lower leg. This resulted in an open tibia fibula fracture and significant bleeding. The firefighter is expected to be off work for about a year. Now, Chief Kehmna, this is kind of one of those random accidents that you can't really prepare for. Can you kind of walk us through any experience you've had in these random occurrences?
It is certainly an unfortunate incident. There's no question about it. An injury like that. I mean, obviously, if somebody ran over the hose and it kicked up the coupling, and that's what hit the firefighter and ultimately broke his leg, my mind automatically goes to scene safety and controlling the scene and traffic through the scene, all the kinds of things that we typically think of and try to provide for any training exercise or emergency incident. I think you said, do I have any experience with it? Yes. Yeah. I can honestly say that we could probably trade stories for the next hour about these, near miss close things like, wow, that could have been a thing. Just life in general presents you with these things from time to time. The fire ground and the training ground are especially prone to these kinds of things, random, silly, unfortunate accidents that could have been prevented had they been foreseen. It's unfortunate that these things do happen.
Yeah, the incident really highlights the importance of public awareness. And even in this article, it says that the driver expressed extreme remorse. This was a complete freak accident. So, what are some key safety reminders that people should keep in mind when driving past an emergency scene?
Certainly, if law enforcement is on scene and they have the area barricaded and the area is closed off to the public, they should obey the rules and give the first responders a clear path to be able to work and drive and go around the scene. Unfortunately, emergency scenes tend to generate a lot of interest. People want to come see, and so they will unfortunately get closer than they should. The real tragedy is oftentimes is the closer they get, the less attention they are paying to what they're supposed to be doing, which is driving, because they're looking at whatever's going on. And so they become a distracted driver, and it just elevates the danger. For us as first responders, the thing is, the main thing is to make sure that the scene that we're working on is safe and that we're doing everything that we can to provide a safe working environment. That means barricades, caution tape, enforcement presence, having somebody, a physical presence, a human being at the entrance and exits from any emergency scene is certainly preferred over just tape and cones, because a human being can not only control traffic if the drivers are listening and obeying, but they can also warn first responders should somebody do something they're not supposed to do. So having somebody physically there posted as a sentry would be ideal. I think the real thing is just to not to take scene safety and those kinds of things for granted. I fear it's a little bit easy to do that, because the work that we do is so inherently dangerous, no matter what it is, whether we're fighting a fire, responding to a hazmat call, or any of the, or training, ladders, hose, all that other kind of stuff. They pose a significant danger, and we wear protective equipment, obviously, to protect ourselves, and we behave in such a way that we protect ourselves when we're lifting or doing any of these kinds of things. And I think what can happen, and I'm going to use myself as an example, not to call anybody out. I will use myself as an example. It's really easy to be focused on the danger that I know. I know the fire is dangerous. I know the chemical from a hazmat call is dangerous. I know those things are dangerous. So I tend to get complacent about the stuff that can be dangerous. Slips, trips, falls. Those kinds of simple, silly things that break bones and take you off work for a significant period of time, and sometimes even worse. It's really hard to not let that creep in because you're so focused on the bigger hazard. And those are probably, unfortunately, those are probably some of the examples that I have, or where I probably fell prey to that.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started this this episode, I'm sure a lot of our listeners were thinking that the injury probably occurred while the firefighter was battling the structure fire. Maybe something fell on him. But no, it's virtually nothing to do with the structure. It was just one of those freak accidents that you're right, it could have been avoided. What are some other freak accidents that you have been exposed to that we can shine some light on and maybe bring to the forefront of people's minds so that maybe they can be a little bit more aware of these more tedious things that can cause significant injury? And I mean, this firefighter's out for a year. Like, that is a very extensive amount of time.
Well, the example that jumps to mind for me is the danger, and I'm not just going to isolate this to first responders. The just inherent danger in working around roadways, specifically, freeways and expressways where people are traveling at a greater rate of speed. There's an exponential amount of danger associated with working alongside the roadway. Sadly, I think everybody listening to this podcast can picture in their mind a sign where a section of roadway or freeway or highway has been named after somebody, an officer or a Department of Transportation worker or somebody who was injured or either injured or killed. And it is tragic. It is unfortunate. And that's probably the example that I would use. That's the scenario that I have been in. When I started my career, I mean, obviously we were responding to vehicle accidents on surface streets and on freeways and so on and so forth. And you have a job to do. You have a vehicle accident. Somebody's maybe trapped in the vehicle, and you got to extricate them out of the vehicle, and then you got to provide for medical care and all this stuff that you have to do. Well, you need space to be able to do that. And unfortunately, not all vehicle accidents are going to afford you a safe space to do that. Sometimes they're spread out all over the roadway, or they're spread out across the roadway. And so controlling traffic is absolutely critical. I will tell you that in my agency, we suffered a very significant incident when we had a fatality within the organization that I worked in, and it was in the wake of the fatality that there was a lot of discussion, a lot of soul searching about what we need to do to prevent it. What we need to prevent that from ever happening again, and a lot of energy and effort was focused on that. And I can remember the fire chief and I were having a discussion about doing the investigation, sort of digging into what that was, what happened so we could prevent it. On the desk, my desk at the time, I was a training captain at the time. On my desk was a new program that we were contemplating, which was called the Safety Support Program. And the Safety Support Program was a program where we would dispatch multiple pieces of equipment, multiple fire engines to vehicle accidents on roadways, specifically so we had a fire truck to park sideways behind the accident to provide a safe area to work in. And I told the fire chief at the time, I said, we will get to the bottom of what occurred on this particular incident, but my recommendation is we put this in place right now, because my personal experience was that working on highways and freeways was very dangerous, that it was something we could do right now that would absolutely make people safer and save lives. And we did it. We did it. I think the entire county ended up doing it. But for me, it was one of those, this is preventable and we should do something about this. Those are the kinds of things I think that we really should be looking for, simple ways to make sure that we're protecting ourselves from a hazard that is unnecessary. I mean, as I said, responding to a vehicle accident, providing extrication, all the things that you're going to do present opportunities for injury. Let's take one of the biggest ones out, getting hit by a car. I don't think you have to go back very far in very recent videos on YouTube to find vehicles crashing into fire trucks. I saw one just a week or two ago. So, and thankfully, the fire truck was there to take the brunt of the damage, and it saved lives.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're absolutely right with those like pedestrian vehicles crashing into first responder vehicles. I see those pop up in the daily dispatch once a week, if not more. It is very, very unfortunate. So it's great that you are part of a department that was working towards minimizing that kind of incident from occurring. I also wanted to address in this article that a good Samaritan played a crucial role in protecting this injured firefighter from oncoming traffic, because the traffic wasn't stopped as obviously, from what happened. So I want to ask you, what does this teach us about the importance of community involvement in emergency situations? We tell them to be clear, give the first responders their space, but what else can we let our public know?
Wow, but so many things. I'm thinking about so many things. I'm even thinking about myself off duty and being a first responder off duty. You spend your time on duty and you're wearing your PPE, you're responding with others, all the things you can do for safety, especially when you're at night, you've got lighting and emergency lighting and all those things to protect you. And I can tell you I have done this off-duty civilian clothes, stepping in and helping out in an emergency, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, okay, we need to move. We're not in a good spot. What I would tell the public is, one, first of all, thank you to a good Samaritan who helped him render aid. It could have very possibly saved his leg, and that is amazing. What I would encourage anybody, especially if they have medical training or just want to assist, is please be mindful of your own safety when you do so. Putting yourself in harm's way and getting yourself injured or killed is something we don't want to see. Please be mindful of your own safety and take every precaution that you can. And if you need to move somebody, specifically to provide for their safety, get them out of the roadway or something like that. You got to be very mindful of not injuring them further and protecting them, as you move them. These can be very complicated, of course. Even we like to, trying to not move patients if we can. Just be careful. That's, I guess, what I would say. Just be careful.
While I was asking you that question, it also came to mind that while the Samaritan in this situation, he played a crucial role and it was very beneficial to the firefighter. I also want to make known that it's important for the public to know when they're not needed to step in as well. Assess the situation. Most of the time, the first responders got it, and the last thing they need is someone that does not have the EMS background, the paramedic background that our firefighters do, stepping in and then possibly putting themselves at risk when it's not necessary, and there's other professionals on scene that are better suited to help out with that situation. So I also want to put that out there too. We're not encouraging anyone to go in and be the hero when it's not needed, because that could cause more issues. And I also want to ask, are there any policies that are in place to protect firefighters during active responses and then them getting injured like this situation? Or does it vary from like fire department to fire department?
It will vary from department to department for sure. I go back to the example that I just gave about the safety support program that we put in place. Not every agency has the capacity or capability to do that. They don't have the resources, the staffing, the equipment to be able to do something like that. And it really is through proper training and education and your policies and procedures that help protect your organization, protect your employees, and it provides that kind of guidance. And everything we do, the training manual is written in such a way to make sure that people understand how to use the equipment properly and safely. Whether we're talking about throwing ground ladders, or we're talking about using chainsaws or rescue equipment or driving apparatus, everything is designed around being properly trained and knowing how to use the equipment in a manner that is safe. And then in the use of that, making sure that you're wearing your proper protective equipment, whether that's, gloves, boots, helmets, turnouts, whatever the case may be. Personal protective equipment is going to vary widely depending on the hazard that you are presented with, and then adhering to those things. And it, it's so easy to get complacent. And again, I'm talking about me. It's easy to get complacent and be like, I just got to do this one thing. I'll put my gloves on in a minute, or I'm just going to start the saw real quick. I don't need my hearing protection or eye protection. I'm good. And it's in that instance when something happens, when it's like, wow, you just take such a risk, and it is really through policy and procedure. You help to minimize that, but it can't all just be documented in policy and procedure as a here's the rule, here's the written word. It's important for organizations to model good behavior, to provide good training, to provide good equipment, and to hold people accountable. As a company officer leading a crew of two or three other people, potentially more, making sure that your crew is properly prepared and trained for whatever the activity happens to be, to make sure that they're taking their precautions and wearing their equipment, and make sure they're properly trained and all of those things. Taking your role seriously, whether you're a firefighter riding backwards on an engine, or your company officer sitting in the right seat, or you're a battalion chief or whatever, taking the roles and responsibility that you have as a first responder seriously is an important first step. One thing I would say is, first responder, I recognize that my role is to maintain my status of readiness so that I can respond to the call. And if I'm taking unnecessary risks by not wearing my PPE or performing, skills in a manner that is dangerous and not taking care, I run the risk of getting myself injured through my own inaction. And then I create a liability for the organization, for the incident, for my, fellow firefighters. So it's about being responsible, as well. And we all know that, and we all want to do that. And I think it's through just gentle reminders that we keep ourselves accountable to you know to do the right thing. It's just, and we have to do it with ourselves too. I have to do it with myself all the time. In retirement, I spend a fair amount of time working around the house, operating at equipment, working in my shop, doing these kinds of things. And it is a lifetime in public safety and a lifetime of training that has me, just, it is locked in that I will wear my PPE. I will always make sure that I am as prepared as I can be, knowing that I'm still prone to being a human being and being impatient and trying to rush through something.
Absolutely. And all it takes, as this article shows, is just that one split second accident for things to go astray.
It is very true. You're hitting it on the head. It's using the power tool, the cutting tool, but squinting instead of putting your glasses on because you're just going to make one quick cut, or whatever the action happens to be. Thinking, just this once. It is just that once. I mean, there's plenty of people out there who could use that as the say, yeah, it was just this once, but you know what? I used to have a finger there, or whatever the case may be. They'll tell you, you know stop and step back.
Yeah, it's a little ironic because in one of our previous episodes, we're talking about, a fire pole versus a fire slide. And the point of those in a firehouse is to save time getting the crews to the vehicle. Well, the point there is that, yeah, we're saving time getting you to the vehicle. We're not saving time by speeding or driving recklessly just to get to the incident faster. So it's about being strategic on where you're saving time at, and is it worth it? Is it worth to squint while you're doing it? Or is it worth it to just take the 2 seconds to put the glasses on and do it properly? Exactly. So, from a fire chief perspective, can you share with us, how does the incident change when it's one of your own firefighters on the scene who are now injured? How does that change the dynamic and the workflow in responding to that incident?
It can be significant for a lot of reasons. It can certainly be, we'll think it from simple to complex. Simply put, the firefighter that was advancing the hose, or maybe connecting to a hydrant, whatever, they had a job to do, and that job was required for whatever the evolution was. If it was a structure fire and they were stretching a line for the purposes of extinguishing the fire to supply an engine, well, now that person is injured and that is no longer happening. So you have an engine that's potentially pumping water that may need connection to a hydrant, or supply lines to an engine. So there may be a water supply issue. Whatever the activity was that firefighter was assigned to do, it is no longer being done. So, assuming that it was a requirement on the fire ground or on the emergency scene, that's a consideration that needs to be taken into account by the incident commander, and now needs to be addressed. The second thing, and probably the bigger issue, is the resources now that it takes away from that scene to care for the firefighter. If you showed up with a couple of engines, or a full structure response, we'll say, to a structure fire, one firefighter down is going to take at least another two or three firefighters to extricate them from the scene safely, to properly care for them. Even if you have a medic unit or ambulance standing by available, which is not always the case, it's probably less often. Even if you have that available to you, It's human resources and physical resources now that have to be taken away from the incident to care for the firefighter. So it has a significant impact in that respect. And the other thing, and maybe this is the biggest thing, I should probably say this is probably the bigger thing, is the emotional impact of it. Um, None of us wants to be injured ourselves first, but we really don't want to see our colleagues and our fellow firefighters injured. It does have an impact on us for sure, and certainly when it's significant, I can tell you, having through it, it can absolutely have a very significant impact on people's emotional state.
Absolutely, Chief Kehmna. Is there anything else that you'd like to add on this topic?
Yeah, as I sort of think through this story here, and I think about lots of examples that I have in my head of when I was either it was either me or I was on scene where something or somebody was injured. It's the thing we got complacent about. It was the slip, trip, fall, no gloves, that kind of thing. It is really easy to get tunneled into what you're doing, the importance of what you're doing. Sometimes lives are at risk. It is really easy to get tunneled into that, and it is really important for us as professionals, as first responders, to remember that we are the most important piece of equipment on any fire apparatus, and we are the piece of equipment that must be taken care of in order for the emergency to be mitigated. So we need to take better care of ourselves than we do the tools on the rig, and I want people to remember that when you train, whether you're tabletop training or whether you're on the drill ground training, think about those things and where you are taking potentially unnecessary risk, and just carry that with you, and just be safe and wear your PPE and all of that. But I think that's what I would share. And again, caveat to all of this, I'm telling me that I'm just sharing with you what it's like to sort of go through just being a silly human being and doing silly stuff.
Right. And I think that is a great point to end on. We're all professionals, you know what you're doing. So just remind yourself of that and act like it. Be on guard on scene and be aware that these silly freak accidents, I say silly loosely. It's a freak accident is what it is. There's nothing silly about, this
Yeah.
firefighter getting hurt, but we know our listeners know what we mean, but you're on scene and you have to be aware, and the oddest things can happen. You just have to be on guard. So thank you for that. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. A link to the article we discussed can be found in the show notes of this episode. And if you have a question for the panel, please reach out to us at fireheadlines@wfca.com and let us know what's on your mind. We'll see you back here next week for more Fire Headlines.